The Agenda in the Summer with Nam Kiwanuka is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
What should schools teach about sex and when? I'm Nam Kiwanuka. That's been one of Ontario's toughest education debates. And tonight, on the Agenda in the Summer, as we continue to revisit tricky discussions from the past decade, is it settled? That's ahead. It's hard to think of another part of the public school curriculum that gets the attention and pushback that sex education does. Let's start off with a glimpse of past debates. Here's one from more than a decade ago.
You read about masturbation and it talks about how pleasurable it is and how good it is to do and how to explore you. Well, there you go. But I don't want you teaching my 12-year-old the pleasures of masturbation. You have no right to do this to our children. You need to listen to the parents. And you know what? The Premier listened. And he found the experts wanting, because when he read this, he said, "What? This material in our schools at the age of 8," and he pulled it and rightfully said, "We're going to strip that away." And by the way, you are right that the sex ed part of this is a very small part of this book.
And 10 pages out of 200 plus, I think.
Yeah, and so they're going to remove that. They're going to continue with the rest of the 190 some odd pages. They're going to go back to the drawing board, and they're not just going to listen to the experts, they're going to listen to parents.
Okay, Shannon, you wanted to.
Last week we were on Ledru, myself and Charles here, and we had numerous parents call in and say, "It's disgusting. It is disgusting." And they say, "What's disgusting? That it's this age?" No, that they even talk about it at all. Sex should not be discussed at all. You've got way too many parents who want to sweep this under the rug. You've got way too many people not understanding what it means to be sexually active or sexual in today's easy access culture who want to sweep this under the rug. It's a big difference between people understanding what kids know and what we're wishing that they do know. I think what's great about this, and it bothers me, you keep talking about the dangers, because as you mentioned, sexuality is not a negative thing. It isn't something to be ashamed of or to wait until you're 17 until you go there, because it's part of us. As we grow, we learn and come into our own sexuality. Our education system should alleviate the pressure of that by talking about it, by educating us.
So, there was a lot of passion in that clip. And just to give some context for that clip, let's take a look at a brief history of the sex education debate in Ontario. So back in 2010, when that show was taped, Liberal Premier Dalton McGuinty tried to change the curriculum. Facing stiff opposition, his government backed down. Then Education Minister Kathleen Wynne was part of the curriculum's formulation. In 2015, then Liberal Premier Kathleen Wynne, Ontario's first woman premier, brings forth a substantially revamped curriculum. She faces massive protest. You can see a photo there on your screen, and thousands of parents pulling their children out of school. In 2018, Progressive Conservative Premier Doug Ford repeals the elementary school curriculum, reinstating a version from 1998. He says parents were not properly consulted. Parents are told to report on teachers who refuse to stop teaching the 2015 curriculum. And in 2019, after conducting his own consultation at a cost of $1 million, Ford puts forward a new curriculum with various similarities to the 2015 version. And joining us now on where it stands today in Sandy, Utah, Teresa Peer, founder and president of Parents as First Educators, a Toronto-based education advocacy group. And in Ontario's capital city, sexuality educator Nadine Thornhill. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Teresa and Nadine, I want to ask you this question, but Teresa, I want you to go first because you're the furthest away from our studio. In a sentence, how would you describe the last decade of arguing about this?
Well, they are very heated arguments, as you've mentioned, and we've seen. I would say that the parents have felt betrayed by the PC party. They promised to repeal this sex ed, and what was returned to parents was essentially the same as the 2015 curriculum. So parents have felt let down. They felt that their children are going to be indoctrinated with an unscientific ideology of gender identity. We don't have a lot of studies on how this is what impact this is going to make on our society. And parents want to rely on the ideals that have shaped our society for thousands of years, that we do have many studies of showing the solidity of the family bond and a traditional view of sexuality. So I would say it's been a letdown for parents, that they've felt that an irresponsible ideology has been foisted on them, and they're not happy about it.
And Nadine?
I would say that the last decade around sex education has been tumultuous, to say the least. And while, there is nothing in this curriculum that invalidates, heterosexuality or marriage or, a family that, has a mother, a father, and children, we do actually have research and plenty of studies that show that it is also beneficial to expand our understanding and make room for folks who also experience aspects of their identity outside of those parameters.
I also just want to say, because even just watching the clip, there is a lot of passion around this conversation. But I truly think that even with you, Teresa and Nadine, even though you're coming from different sides, I think at the heart of it is that everybody wants the best for kids. And Teresa, I just wanted to follow up on something that you said, that, this kind of, you felt a bit of betrayal from Doug Ford, and he was very vocal about replacing Kathleen Wynne's 2015 curriculum. In the end, just how similar was his 2019 curriculum to hers?
It was almost identical. He changed a couple of benchmarks, switched the introduction of homosexuality from grade 6 to grade 5. He introduced the term marriage, I believe, one time in the curriculum. The tweaks were not what we expected from his government.
In your opinion, what have the effects of teaching this curriculum been on Ontario kids?
We find that the concern is that children are being confused about the very nature of what gender is. There was a case brought to the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal by an Ottawa family whose child in grade 1 was told by their teacher in a class that there is no such thing as a boy or a girl. And this child was so upset that she didn't want to go to school. She had to see a doctor about whether it was okay to have feelings about being a girl. She decided she didn't want to have children. She was just emotionally distraught. And her parents moved her from that school system after trying, to get recourse from the teacher, but not finding the support that they sought from the teacher or the principal. And that's an example of how very young kids are being indoctrinated. Even though the benchmarks don't include gender ideology for grade 1, teachers are still putting it in, and there's nothing that parents can do about it.
Nadine, I saw you wanted to get in on this.
Yes, so I'm familiar with the case that Teresa is mentioning in Ottawa. I actually lived in Ottawa for many years. So there's 3 quick points I want to make about that. Number 1, what that individual teacher taught is not what is contained within the curriculum. Number 2, it's terrible that this child felt distraught and was apparently traumatized. And so what that says to me is that what teachers need is that they need more support and more resources to be able to teach these topics in developmentally appropriate ways, because that is possible. We see that frequently. For example, we have books and TV shows that are geared towards young children that give them examples, again, of people who are in what we would describe as heterosexual relationships. We teach kids about gender norms when they align with what we would call a cisgender person. So it is possible, and it's important for teachers to have those supports so that they can teach these topics in developmentally appropriate ways. But thirdly, I would also point out, let's consider how distraught this young person was when her experience of gender was invalidated. And so I don't want to see a curriculum that invalidates the experience of children who may experience their own gender in diverse and expansive ways. This is an example of exactly what can happen when we don't have those conversations.
I want to follow up on that comment, Nadine, because the latest curriculum has gender identity being taught in grade 8 rather than being introduced in grade 3. What have the impacts of that been?
Well, first, when we talk about gender identity being introduced in grade 3, it is simply a suggestion it's one example of how people have visible and invisible differences. And so when we're talking about introducing gender and discussions of gender identity in the early years, what a teacher might do is point out that, the way that somebody dresses, the name that they have, the way they style their hair, that is not necessarily an indication of whether they're a boy or a girl. And they may say that, some people may not use those words, boy or girl, to describe themselves. That's all we need to talk about when they're young. What we're doing when they're younger is building up those foundations so that when they become older, we can start to have the more complex conversations. But moving that entire discussion until 8th grade is basically saying that if somebody is trans, if somebody is non-binary, we can't even talk about them until somebody is 13. And there's an implication there that there's something fundamentally wrong or incomprehensible about that person's identity, which can be incredibly damaging. And we see that play out in society time and time again when we see how that stigma directly impacts trans and non-binary people's lives in an incredibly negative and dangerous way.
Teresa, Nadine talked about the stigma. For you, what do you feel the current curriculum undermines?
I would say that the traditions of traditional sexuality keeps the age of childhood as a period of sexual latency and doesn't introduce concepts of sexuality until the age that we're talking about, in order that children's mental abilities are developed to the point, their emotional capacities are developed to the point at which they're able to handle it responsibly. We know that the teen brain is still developing in this way, and the brains of children are not ready to absorb these concepts at young ages.
Nadine, what do you feel is the driving force behind opposition to the curriculum?
So I think that a lot of the opposition comes from fear, and I don't want to be too critical of parents who do have fear, because I think that fear actually often comes from a very loving, caring place. We have lived in a society that for centuries has told us that anything related to sexuality, and remember that when we talk about things related to sexuality, we're also talking about things like just the body. We're talking about things like, how to navigate relationships, and not just sexual relationships, romantic relationships. We're talking about family. We're talking about identity. And these are things that, as Teresa actually mentioned, these things are developing as children grow up, but they don't suddenly just, click into place when a kid is 13. A child has a body from the time that they're born. A child is observing the world. They're observing how people have relationships. They observe how people talk to each other. They're slowly learning about things like, consent. And I mean, consent is huge. Again, it's not just something that happens within the context of a sexual relationship. And so I think parents are afraid that when we talk about sexuality, we're always talking about the act of sex, and we are absolutely not. We're talking about a lot of things that may inform sex one day. But just like, we talk to kids about family and politics and driving and all sorts of things that they're not going to do for many, many years, sex education starts to lay a foundation so that they can grasp these concepts slowly, again, in developmentally appropriate ways over time, instead of throwing everything at them all at once when they're teenagers or young adults.
Teresa, I don't want to contradict your experience at all. I was joking with a friend recently that if I was to start dating now, I wouldn't know how to manage myself because of the technology. Even before I got married, I was a very awkward dater. Do you maybe agree that because we have so many other, with the technology kids are exposed to, it's really difficult for parents to maybe see everything that is happening in the world? And even now, like this past 18 months with kids learning online. Is there any part of what Nadine has said that maybe, looking back, it might be a mistake that parents in opposition to the sex ed curriculum have made trying to be understood, while trying to be understood?
Well, I'd first like to respond to Nadine's characterization of parents as coming from a place of fear. I respectfully think that that is a kind of a demonization of the opposition. They're parents that what they're really trying to do with their children is create a respectful view around the body. And we feel that introducing all of these concepts so young distorts that reality that we understand. I don't believe that these parents, I mean, there are some parents who want to put up a wall and say, absolutely nothing. But most of the parents that we're talking to are in answer to your original question, what do we agree on? There are gradual steps of learning about the body that and consent and that kind of thing that are introduced appropriately at young levels. But there's just so much else in this curriculum, especially the gender ideology portion, that really undermine the respect for sexuality that we're seeking.
Nadine?
So I'm curious, what is it that you feel undermines your ability at home to say, I believe something different? In grade 1, the only prompt related to sexual development is we're naming all the body parts, including genitalia. In grade 2, the only prompt related to sexuality and consent is, learning to start to say no and identifying, just some personal body boundaries. In grade 3, all we're saying is that people are different, and some of the differences you can see, and some of the differences you can't. Respect that. So I'm not sure how that's problematic or how that prevents you from talking about your personal values or beliefs with your children.
Teresa, you've said that some parents are re-educating their kids at home after school. Would that tie into what Nadine is saying right now?
I don't think that it's a negative thing to, of course, discuss ideas with your child. But the problem is that the children don't always understand or have the words for the confusion that they're experiencing at school. Parents don't always know what's happening at school, so they can't initiate those conversations. So parents are put at a disadvantage. And you mentioned that there are set benchmarks within the curriculum. However, the government stated in a legal case in 2018 that teachers are not bound to respect those benchmarks. They can teach from outside of the curriculum, outside of the year that is in question, as long as they don't test on it. So this has opened a floodgate of ideas reaching these younger kids that is very distressing to children and parents.
Teresa, would you rather we go back to the 1998 curriculum?
Yes, I definitely would. They changed one prompt on cyberbullying. They moved it from grade 7 to grade 4. That's about the only component that I would keep from the new version. I do think that is happening younger, and but I think you could easily update one or two sections of the 1998 curriculum, and you would have a more suitable curriculum.
Nadine, do you think that we should go back to the 1998 curriculum?
Absolutely not. I mean, first of all, I am 45 years old. I graduated high school in 1994. I do not want to see people using a curriculum that was literally developed in the last decade, 4 years after I left high school, and I'm a middle-aged person. We have had, there have been so many advancements in terms of sexual health when it comes to sexual health care and medical advancements. The internet is a thing now, as we mentioned before, that is mentioned nowhere in the 1998 curriculum. There is no mention of consent in the 1998 curriculum. And quite frankly, the reality is that whether it makes, individual people comfortable or not, gender diverse and sexually diverse people exist. Gender diverse and sexually diverse families exist. Gender diverse and sexually diverse youth and teens exist, and they deserve to be acknowledged. We cannot make entire groups of people in our culture invisible and make their experiences invisible because it makes us uncomfortable, or because we don't know how to have those conversations, or because we're struggling through this moment. One of the reasons that a lot of us struggle to have these conversations is because we didn't have the benefit of that education when we were young and growing up. And so, yes, of course, now we are having a struggle. But, I've never heard anyone say, well, you know what, math is complicated and complex. So what we should do is not teach it or not talk to anybody about it until they're 17. We don't say, well, politics are complicated, so we're not going to have civics classes anymore. We're not going to have little kids' books where we talk about how there's, a mayor or a president or a prime minister. Don't say anything to them about it until they're 18 and ready to vote. What we typically do with topics and ideas that are complex is we find a way to start simply, and we teach it over time so that kids and youth and teenagers have a chance to absorb that information as they grow up. And there is plenty of research and evidence that shows that for kids and youth, learning things a little bit at a time over a long period of time is generally a more effective way for them to understand complex topics than, giving it all to them all at once when they are older or when they're adults.
Teresa, what is your response to what Nadine said?
Well, as far as the advances in sexual health, I don't really think that is the purview of schools to be diagnosing those things and raising that in a public forum. I think that's more for a medical practitioner to be dealing with. And the old curriculum certainly does treat the general topic of sexually transmitted diseases. And I think, in any small additions could be made there. As far as the acknowledgement of transsexuality and that sort of thing, kids do need to know that is happening. I think that kind of information is more appropriate, more suited to be introduced in high school, really. So that is something that, again, could be added. And I don't think that the realities of sexuality have changed all that much. And that's why I believe that we could return to the 1998 curriculum, with a couple of updates, including the addition of sexting, which Nadine has brought up. That's something that the old curriculum doesn't contain. That and moving the issue of cyberbullying down, and but those are easy fixes to make, and I don't think require an entirely new curriculum to do.
Nadine, both left-leaning, liberal and right-leaning progressive conservative parties seem to be in agreement when it comes to how children should be taught about sex in Ontario. What does that say about what Ontarians make of this issue?
So, I think if you ask any individual Ontarian, you're going to get slightly different answers. And I actually agree with Teresa. A curriculum is absolutely made up of a series of values and value judgments. We make them all the time. And so I think, what's going to happen is that there are also different value systems. We have our personal values, we have family values, we have community values, we have social values. And some of what you see reflected in curricula, and in particular in the sexual development components of this health and phys ed curriculum, some of that reflects some of our social values, and some of the social values we have here in Ontario, or purport to have, are inclusion, are equity, fairness, nonviolence. And so these updates to the curriculum support those things. Those things, or the way those values are taught in the curriculum or outlined in the curriculum, may be in conflict with some people's personal or family values. But there is nothing in the curriculum that prevents a family from having discussions about what their family values are, or about what their personal values are. And in fact, that specific curriculum, the health and phys ed curriculum, in its opening pages, acknowledges parents and families as children's first educators. So yeah, I think that different people in the province are going to have different feelings about this curriculum, this part of the curriculum, and other curricula also, because we're all individuals and we're all working based on our own personal value systems as well.
Teresa, and just to circle back to the beginning of our conversation, when you mentioned that Doug Ford let down the movement, where do you feel as if your voice isn't being heard? Are you worried about the future of your movement?
I feel that in Ontario, it has not been supported the way that it was promised. In other provinces in the country, they do have more family-oriented curricula. So, we feel that things could change with different political leadership, and so we're not concerned about that. We just need to keep working towards that. As far as the fact that we need to find a middle ground for Ontarians with very different belief systems, that's not going to go away. So that's why we are in favor of really keeping the curriculum to the facts of biology and the introduction of material as it is needed, and not kind of enhancing it with ideologies that the others have difficulties with.
And Nadine, 30 seconds. Is it possible to find a middle ground for this?
I don't know. I really don't know. But I will say, as someone who's been a sexuality educator for over 15 years, working with parents, teachers, and youth, I do feel strongly that the curriculum that we have is based on well-researched and well-tested principles. And I think it's a solid start.
Nadine and Teresa, thank you so much for being on the show tonight. And it was a very civil conversation, of course, and we all learned a lot from both of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And that's it for tonight's Agenda in the Summer. Tomorrow, we revisit the debate about how Ontario's first NDP government tackled tough economic times and what it tells us about what current governments face. I'm Nam Kiwanuka. Thanks for watching TVO and for joining us online at tvo.org.
The Agenda in the Summer with Nam Kiwanuka is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.